Welcome, everyone. It is Thursday, October 21st. This is our second night with Venerable Urbina Corton on Everything is a Viewpoint. We had a great session last night. I'm happy you're all here and certainly thrilled that Venerable Urbina is back with us. So we can turn to our refuge and bodhicitta prayers. Would you like me to drop the slides, Venerable Urbina?
I think it's nice if we can see them, yes, and I'll lead them, and then people can just read if they like, yes, or if they know the prayer. Fantastic.
Thank you. Go ahead.
There we go. So we just always the same. I always repeat what it is, and it's important to know what we're doing. The first two lines are for those of us who kind of feel we've already committed to being a Buddhist. So it's kind of reiterating our reliance on the Buddha and his teachings. And the second two lines are stating this marvelous kind of motivation, purpose, or goal for being together, listening to these teachings. And that is, we're going to listen to these teachings to take some tools from these advice so that we can develop our marvelous potential, no matter how long it takes, to become a Buddha, so then we can be of perfect benefit to others. That's our long-term goal, you know. Okay, so I'll say it in English the first time with a few extra words just to get it clear what we're saying. And then we can sing it twice in Tibetan. So we're saying, until we are enlightened, we're going to rely upon the Buddha, his teachings, and the spiritual community. And by the virtuous karmic seeds we plant in our mind from listening to these teachings, may they eventually ripen as our Buddhahood, no matter how long it takes, so we can be of benefit to others. Sangye chadang soke chognam la janchu baru dagni kyabsu chi dagi chunyen gipa sonam ki sangye dropa shog sangye chadang soke chognam la dagi chunyen gipa sonam ki drola penche sangye dropa shog. Thank you, Gina. So we talked last night, you know, about very much the mind, how it functions, and the Buddha's very specific view. Let's go over that a bit. And then I wanted to talk more about the speech tonight, which is not so much about everything's a viewpoint, but it's something pretty powerful, you know. So I think the key thing that really stuck with me from last night, I was thinking about it again today, and someone has asked me a question, is that this key point that the Buddhist view of the mind makes, which is not the way we think about things in our culture. So, for example, let's say you see or read about something awful that a person does. You see they did do this, they raped, they tortured, they lied, they stole, whatever it might be. Hang on. The thing is, what we don't distinguish between, we discussed this last night, the simple fact that you're seeing, indeed, you saw a person steal. I'm not even saying you're speculating. Or you saw a person punch someone in the nose. You did see that. So you can say that was a fact. I saw them punch that person in the nose. You can say that. But what we don't distinguish is between that simple fact and then the inevitable anger about that fact. We think they're the same thing. In fact, we don't really distinguish. We just assume, because you see a bad thing happen, the seeing of the bad thing equals being angry with it. So like we discussed last night, you know, just like the opposite so there's a chocolate plate on the cake, the chocolate cake on the plate. That's a fact. Like the person punching, that's a fact. What happens is, you know, enormous attachment arises, and then that makes the cake look incredibly delicious, divine, and you grasp to get it. So then when we hear Buddha say, well, you've got, you know, not appropriate to have attachment because it exaggerates and it's not valid. So then we think giving up attachment to cake, we chuck out the bathwater and think, oh, well, the cake must be ugly, because we're not distinguishing between the fact, like I said last night, that might be the cake that won the blue ribbon. It might indeed, relatively speaking, conventionally speaking, according to the laws of cake making, it might well be the best chocolate cake possible. So we assume that attachment to chocolate cake, that the description of chocolate cake that attachment makes and the chocolate cake are the same. Just like we assume seeing a person punch, we assume that means you get angry. We don't see the difference. And that's the point, that if we can see the difference, that's the revelation. Then we can see the world, we can have intelligence, we can have wisdom, we can see there's a chocolate cake, there's a person punching, but we don't get angry and we don't get attached. Now that's what's almost impossible in the way we understand it in the world, you know, and this is the key to understanding the job of being a Buddhist, which of course means you've got to distinguish what attachment is and what is aversion, what are their function, what in this assessment of that punch and that chocolate cake. And that's the viewpoint piece. So you could argue that that's a chocolate cake. Even that is a viewpoint. From the more subtle point of view, from the final wisdom point of view, it is a chocolate cake conventionally, but ultimately, no. You can even say that's still a viewpoint. But on the relative conventional level, it fits the definition of a chocolate cake. No problem. Don't chuck that out. That fits the definition of a punch. This is the point. And so how are you going to do that distinguishing if you don't study the Buddhist view and know precisely what is attachment, what is aversion? And if we don't, we can make an idea. We can say what we think attachment is, but that's not enough. I'm sorry. You have to know precisely. So like we're talking, they are viewpoints. In other words, the Buddhist view is at the mental, we have mental consciousness and we have sensory consciousness. So sensory consciousness is pretty straightforward, but still, this is again, a revelation for us when we understand the Buddha's view. So, you know, let's say, I use the example of always my thermos. Where's my thermos today? Here it is with my trusty. Okay, so this is a really interesting point. I'll say, Mummy, what's that? You know, she'll say, well, sweetheart, that's called a thermos. Now, we know the label. I hear the label, but I have no idea of what it is. And this is already proving that everything's a viewpoint, everything's merely labeled by the mind. Because this is the thing, getting to emptiness now. If that were intrinsically a thermos, if that were a thermos in its bones, I wouldn't need to ask. It would be evident that it's a thermos. This is the conclusion, that if something were inherently true, you'd know it already. So the fact that I have to ask, what is that? That proves that it has no intrinsic nature, because you don't know what it is. You have to ask. That means it's called label. We call it that. We invented it. Who invented thermoses? Humans did. Our minds invented thermoses. So that even proves very simply, everything comes from the mind. We invent them, you know. Didn't fall out of a tree. So what is it? She tells me the label. And then I'll say, what is it? Because I don't know. I don't know what its job is. I don't know what its function is. Another word, I don't know what its meaning is. So she'll give me the definition. Well, darling, she'll say, as you can see, it's a flat-bottomed metal container. That's the first part of the definition. It tells you its conventional characteristics. But I still don't know what it is. This is the crucial part of it. Then she'll say, I say, but what does it do? And she'll give me the final part of the definition, which is what actually tells us that's its function. Oh, sweetheart, it keeps my tea warm. Now, to really even get it established conventionally that this is validly a thermos, you have to prove that it fits the definition. Well, that's easy enough. She puts the tea in there. We put the lid on. 2 hours later, we go back and we prove that it's still warm. So now she's proven that it is what you define it as. This is how you establish something as existing. And even this alone, if we could get this clear on the planet, we'd all be in heaven. So we not only don't know the ultimate meaning of something, we don't even know the conventional meaning of something. We make up our own rubbish, you know. So even knowing the conventional reality of something is already a step forward. Now, but this is the interesting point. We've got sensory consciousness and we have mental consciousness. Now, look at the difference. This is a revelation too. This tells us the Buddhist approach to the mind and how we cognize things and how we make a complete mess of those cognitions most of the time. Okay, so if you use your eye consciousness, your sensory consciousnesses, your eye consciousness, ear consciousness, nose consciousness, etc. Consciousness is known in general as the capacity for cognition, but also a specific one, a moment of your cognition. That's an eye consciousness. And so what is that? What is the function of the senses? They're very limited in their capacity for cognition. So you show that in front of my face. My eye consciousness will only actually cognize two things: shape and color. It does not have the capacity to cognize a thermos. Why? Because that's the function of mental consciousness. Mental consciousness. We have mental consciousness and we have sensory consciousness. But this is the problem. As Lama Yeshe says, we make the body the boss. So we never think for 1 second that I'm not cognizing with my eyes. You know, oh, what a beautiful thermos, I will say. I mean, I chose this on, you know, online because I liked the design, the shape and the color, and it suited my mind. Which part of my mind? My mental consciousness, my tendency is I like that particular shape, that particular color. So I call it a well-designed thermos. Now that's not the capacity of your eyes or the other senses. That's the function of your mental consciousness. Now, what part of your mental consciousness? Buddha is asserting we've got these much subtler levels of mental cognition, mental consciousness, which are non-conceptual. Now, the best we can do is just hear the words. We can't imagine that because we don't posit such a level of mind in modern psychology and in neuroscience. We only posit the grosser level, which is called conceptuality, which is how we began. Everything is a viewpoint. We live at the level of viewpoints. We live at the level of conceptuality, thoughts, and thoughts are viewpoints. That is a thermos. It's a viewpoint. Now, it happens to be conventionally a valid viewpoint. Why? Because we've all agreed that is a thermos. This almost is proving emptiness already. It's by agreement. We call it a thermos. This is very interesting. So we live at the level of conceptuality. We live at the level of the mental consciousness. And as Lama Zopa puts it, that's where the workshop is. That's what we've got to do, all the unpacking and unraveling and deconstructing. That's where the chaos is and where all the mess is and all the dramas. And fortunately, that's where our potential for Buddhahood exists. We start at that level. And then when we learn to get single-pointed concentration, where we completely subdued the berserk uncontrolled conceptuality, and we can get to the level of subtler cognition, and we can get to do our Mahamudra meditation, and we can get to realize emptiness and so on and so forth at a subtler level. But the way we live at the moment, the way we live at the level of our senses. And as Lama Yeshe says, we make the body the boss. As far as we are concerned, our sensory experiences run the show. If you feel good in your body, you think you had a happy day. If you don't feel good, even the slightest knee ache, everything is distressing, you know, life is miserable. So our sensory awarenesses dominate our lives and we confuse our cognitions all the time. So there we go. Where's my boyfriend tonight? I must have to have somebody else. Timothy Brown. Oh, no, there he is. There's Claude. I nearly chose another boyfriend, Claude. I saw you. There's Claude. So let's say I've got attachment in my mind, and remember, the valid cognition is there is Claude. Like that's a thermos. We all agree this is the person called Claude. He's not Mary or Fred, you know. So that's a valid cognition. That's Claude. But if I've got attachment for Claude, like I said before, I can't distinguish between the Claude that's there and my fantasy of Claude. This is the problem. Now, but even before that, what my eye consciousness sees Claude, and we know if you're in love with Claude, you just see him from the distance, already you're in bliss. And you think you're seeing with your eyes divine, handsome Claude. You think you're seeing with your eyes a beautifully well-designed thermos. Not true. Your eyes can only see shape and color. And handsome divine Claude is your mental consciousness, a series of viewpoints based on attachment that paints a divine picture of Claude that then which story I then believe is the objective truth, like as if deliciousness is coursing through his veins along with his blood. This is how we live our lives. This is how we lead ourselves up garden paths. So, you know, the Buddhist analysis is pretty amazing, but we have to learn it. These words I'm saying, from the little bit that I know about Buddhism, you can't just make up this. This is Buddhist analysis. It's so brilliant, you know. So first we have to distinguish between the deluded part of our mind, which is the attachment, anger, jealousy, pride, and the valid cognitions, that is Claude, that is a punch, that is a cake, and the deluded ones. That's already the liberating. But even more powerful is we need to distinguish between the mere function of the senses and then the story that follows immediately. So I see that color and shape. Then what happens? What happens? I merely see color and shape, but within a millionth of a second, as Lama Yeshe says in Mahamudra, the mind works quicker than computers. This is not a joke, more brilliant than the best computers. Within a millionth of a second, my mental consciousness is accessed. And what's in my mental consciousness? All my thoughts, all my opinions, all my viewpoints, billions of them. And we bring them from past lives. This is also what's utterly fascinating in Buddhist psychology. There's not a single thing that any being experiences in their mind, millisecond by millisecond, that goes astray. Everything is stored in the mental consciousness as memories. That's why you can get clairvoyance. That's why when you're a Buddha, you can literally see everything that exists. There's nothing that you can't cognize, because everything is stored in the mind. This is so powerful. So we come into this life, first of all, with karmic imprints, tendencies, and then we come stored with these billions of memories. We can't access 99% of them. Of course we can't. But the little bit that we have, and I have, so I've remembered that's Claude. I remember he's divine. I've built up this big drama in my mind. And so he appears to me as if my eyes are seeing a divine, handsome Claude. They're not. My mind makes up that story. And this is proven it's a story because, as we discussed yesterday, when I discover he cheats on me, what happens to my story? I chuck out those conceptual stories and a bunch of new conceptual stories come up, disgusting, ugly, revolting Claude. We know this. And it's as if your eyes are seeing an ugly person. We know these experiences. So first we have to distinguish between sensory and mental. That's already incredible, which really proves that things are made up by our mind, by our mental consciousness. And then within the mental consciousness, we have to distinguish between the fantasies, the lies, the misconceptions, the nonsense, the delusions that dominate our lives, and the valid cognitions. This is the job of being a Buddhist, okay? And it's a big, intense job, second by second. This is how you get enlightened. This is the job from here to Buddhahood. So we have to distinguish between the viewpoints. Some are valid and some are a load of rubbish. And we believe in the load of rubbish ones. That's our tragedy. And we don't even know they're a load of rubbish. We don't even know they are not valid concepts. I mean, it's such a peculiar way to say it. Your therapist doesn't talk like this. Well, they do to some degree. There's some kind of therapy called, what is it called? Cognitive behavioral therapy, you know, by changing your actual concepts, you change the way you exist. That's Buddha's deal. Buddha's your first cognitive therapist, I tell you, no doubt about it. So all of this, of course, implies an incredibly sophisticated awareness of what the hell is going on in our mind second by second. And that's so difficult because why? Because from the second we wake up in the morning until the second we're asleep at night, where's all our attention going? The external world, the objects of the senses. They completely dominate our lives. The objects of the senses, and then instantly kicking into our opinions about them, our viewpoints about them, you know. So we have to learn to develop some kind of skill to distinguish between the nonsense in our mind and the valid states. To know what is true and what is not. That's being a Buddhist, I tell you. So that's really a summary of what we talked about last night. So maybe you've got any questions about that. I mean, we'll see if we happens about going into the speech one. But any questions since last night, and certainly the last 30 minutes, any questions? 23 minutes, 20 minutes, because I was late.
And
Yes.
Colette has a question.
Colette, yes, sweetheart.
Hold on, Colette, we can't hear you.
Unmute, Colette. There she goes. Well done.
There you go. How are you? Thank you
Good.
for your brilliant talks. I really enjoyed that.
Good.
Now, taking the information you've given, I've got this little scenario and I don't know how to deal with it. For example, I've been playing in the summer this game of pickleball with a group of lovely people, but there's one lady there who just picks on me, picks on me, picks on me. I use the wings of wisdom and compassion. Don't be like her. She must be hurting, da, da, da. It's all great until she takes the pickleball paddle and just smacks me with it violently just because she thought it would be funny. I didn't even think about this. My head whipped around like Satan, and I flew into a rage, and I told her I was going to take her down to the 7th level of hells. And I'm thinking, where did that come from?
I understand.
Like, it must be stored in
Yes.
my sense, but I mean, I had no control to even look at the mind.
I understand. It's a very good example. Absolutely. So is she a close friend or just a distant friend or what?
It's just an acquaintance. But the thing is, I haven't gone back to play there because even though I feel compassion and wisdom, blah, 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 I'm scared she's going to hit me again. And I don't know how to deal with this.
Well, that's another discussion, whether you're scared of it. But the interesting point is what happened was basically, you know, you were trying to practice, you were trying to be patient, you were trying to be kind, but your attachment wasn't, increasingly didn't get what it wanted. And then your anger started to rise. And then that was the straw that broke the camel's back, and out came the anger, isn't it? Now,
But
this
it
is
was violent.
there you go. And probably you shocked yourself as much as her. What? So, okay, this is an interesting point, because remember I said last night, maybe today we talk about speech. This is where this practice comes in. This is the interesting point, Colette. If we look at the world and just forget about rapists and murderers and all that, just look at the fights that we have in relationships. Look at the arguments we have. Look at the dramas in families, children and parents, parents with each other, mummies and daddies, God knows what. Have a look at it. I mean, the fighting is when we speak, isn't it? We mightn't hit each other, but the fighting is from the speech. Would you agree with that?
Yeah.
And
absolutely.
look at the damage. This is what's so fascinating in the Buddhist approach. There are levels of practice, you know, the very first level of practice. And this sounds odd to us in our culture, because what happens is, for us in our culture, you know, the methods we have to deal with our problems, we call it psychologists, we call it counselors, we call it therapists. And of course, we wait until it's really serious before we go to a therapist. If you went to a therapist and said, well, you know, I'm beginning to feel quite angry thoughts, but I haven't actually said anything yet to my husband, she'd almost say, well, it's a bit soon. Don't come, wait till you want to kill him. So we tend in our culture to have a view that it's only when it's really serious do you go to the therapist. Well, for me, that is insane as saying you wait till your wheels are falling off the freeway at 100 miles an hour before you decide to go to a bloody mechanic. We know, and this is not, it's a simple example, but it's so profound. We know when it comes to our houses, our plumbing, our electricity, our bodies, even if we're reasonable, you know, our hair, our cars, we have maintenance. We understand maintenance. You maintain your things before the problems start. But the total tragedy is we don't have that view about our mind. We think we got to suffocate. We just think, oh, I'm feeling terrible. I'm so depressed. But we don't, we almost feel ashamed that we've got problems because, quite frankly, we don't have maintenance. Maybe more these days with therapy, and people have techniques But really, it's still quite shocking that we only go to the therapist, or we don't go to the therapist at all, and then you kill your husband and wonder what happened. And that's your example is such a brilliant one. I mean, it's clear you're a nice person. You don't go around smashing everybody in the face. You're just like you're a very nice person. You obviously try to practice, and there you were actually trying to be kind, thinking you were being kind, and then suddenly out came these words. Now that's just the proof that if we understand the first level of practice, which is already stupendous, is consciously making the decision and making the effort every day. Forget about controlling the mind, Colette, to control the servants of the mind, which is your speech. Do you hear me? And this is already a stupendous practice. It means you're using your mind, and it does also mean you're trying to control your mind, but it has to be a very proactive, intentional decision every day. I'm going to watch my speech like a hawk. And we all know when you decide to do something is when you'll do it. So the mind, then the second level of practice is when now you begin to deal with the stuff that drives our behavior. I mean, you think of the world, if we all had good behavior, there'd be no rape, no stealing, no murder. Do you understand my point? The mind is what runs it all. But this Buddhist approach, which is so marvelous, and it seems a bit sort of odd initially, we don't think about just controlling our speech. But this is already powerful. Already it's tremendous to do it. Then we have the luxury of being able to be aware of what the hell is going on in the mind beneath it. And if you could do this, you wouldn't have said those words. You wouldn't have harmed that woman, or harmed yourself for that matter, but words harm other people. And once you've got the words out, it's going to be very hard for you to forget them and for her to forget them. Do you understand? I mean, look at families. Look at the schisms in families, in relationships. Eventually, some words are just, it's too much now. You can't, it's too hard to get go of it. Speech is so powerful. So it's huge, but it's fascinating, isn't it, Colette, that it shows how little we really see our mind. We mean well, but we shouldn't be despairing. It just means you've got a lot more work to do. That's all. But start with this powerful wish to control your mind, to control your speech. At least to not say the words. At least, and you do that when you do your 4 opponent powers. If you do your practice at the end of the day, you regret the stuff you've done and said to harm others. You have compassion. You do the practice, and you vow for 24 hours, for example, I will watch my speech like I will not say one negative word. It sounds kind of corny, but it is profound. Because we tend to think, I'm allowed to say what I like. Speech doesn't matter, but it's just clearly not true. Are we communicating?
That's wonderful. I will set, when I do my sitting practice in the morning, I will actually set that intention, and I will write it down to reinforce it. I never thought of doing it.
I know we don't think this way. And when it's intentional, you know very well, if you make a firm decision to do something, you won't forget your decision.
Mm-hmm.
And just do it. Not just feel guilty or a bad person. I hope I don't speak bad words again. I will watch my speech for 24 hours or 10 or 5 or whatever you think, And then that's the first level. Then you can deal with the pain and the hurt privately, in your mind.
Thank you.
It's very much, but it's very powerful. Thank you, Colette. And that you're not, that's everybody has an experience like this. There's no doubt. So that's why I think, again, it's surprising to us to think you have a practice called controlling the speech. That's why there's this wonderful meditation in our center here in where I am in Santa Fe. We do a morning meditation, 7 o'clock every weekday. And the one I always like to do when I lead it, it's this month, it's on the Monday morning at 7 a.m. Mountain time. It's actually a meditation called Blessing the Speech. It sounds so cute. And I love this practice. It's actually reciting the Sanskrit syllables. It's said to be so powerful. They're the syllables that make up all the mantras. And it's a very sweet visualization. And it's really kind of powerful because the way the Buddhists talk is speech is the most powerful thing of all. Buddha's gift to us is his words, so we need our speech even in daily life to be useful. You need your speech to be understood. You need your speech to be considered to be reasonable. You need to be believed.
you know, and from harming in the past, from abusive speech, from lying, from gossiping, we get the consequences. So speech is really quite tremendous, you know, and we know in our lives we need good speech. If you go to even buy something in a shop, you want a person to listen to you, you know, you want a person to believe your words. So really having practices related to speech is kind of marvelous, you know. Good on you, Colette. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
I know it's shocking when we see our mind pop up, isn't it? It's very amazing. Okay, anybody else? Any points, please, dearest people? For the speech one, I want to talk more. If anybody have anything to say, please say it.
I don't know if anyone wants to follow Colette.
Christine, yes, Christine, sweetheart. Thanks. Thank you, Gina. Yeah.
Mhm.
Christine, talk to me.
This question may be one that shows my immaturity and youth.
Christine, come on.
Tact with speech and really knowing when something needs not be said.
That's right.
I am still at 45, and although right now, you know, I have a terminal illness, but
Yeah.
I am trying to still learn tact.
There you
in
go,
language.
darling. Christine, right.
I'm still trying to learn tact in what I say
Yes,
and
darling.
and right intent of
There you go,
speech.
sweetheart. Perfect, perfect. It's so interesting, isn't it? And it is very fascinating speech, because we really have a view in our culture that, you know, we call it communicating, we call it sharing. And I think we then start to go overboard, and we start to then think we have a right to give opinions to everybody about what they are. I think that's the thing that's, you know, and we don't have much. It's a really good point. We don't have much tact. We don't, because we don't consider that's important. We consider we're so overwhelmed by our right to say what we want that we don't think of it, as Colette said, we don't really think of it as a very particular practice, but it's got some real meaning, hasn't it? And we learn the hard way. And so we should look, I think, another interesting point, Christine, let's look at what it is inside us. What delusion is it that drives us to be compelled to pour out our speech? Should we look at that, Christine?
Absolutely.
Let's do that. So first of all, there's like angry speech. That's one thing. So, you know, Colette's wonderful example. And then and that is clear, I think. I mean, in my life, speech has been anger's been my problem, and then speaking it out. I used to pride myself on saying anything I wanted whenever I wanted. And there can be a good quality. That can be a good quality to be very direct. There can be. But for me, it was always hurting other people with my speech. I maybe didn't punch too many people, but my speech can be quite heavy, you know. So I've really had to learn that one. It's very powerful. But the other one that often drives us isn't anger, but is this craving to be heard. And I think everybody has got this. This is the subtlest attachment of all. I mean, we talk about attachment to cakes and attachment to sex and attachment to music or whatever. But the most primordial attachment we all have, that's so utterly drives all of us, that's so hard to see because it's so normal. And they call it in Buddhist psychology, they call it, and it sounds odd, attachment to reputation. But look at it. What it means is we have this emotional hunger to be seen and approved of by other people. Now, when we understand attachment is the symptom, the way Buddha describes it. It's a symptom of like a half a person. You feel empty, you feel bereft, you feel lonely, or you feel hungry, emotionally hungry. So you eat the cake, you get this, you get that. But the deepest way it manifests in all of us to one degree or another is this craving to be seen and heard, which tells us that we have very little self-respect. If you already saw and heard yourself, if you were fulfilled in yourself, you would not have a craving to be heard by others. So, you know, we have this as a deeply instinctive one, and it pours out our mouth. So I think this is behind for most of us. So there's no control. I mean, forget the one about anger. This is another one that, and it doesn't on the face of it seem offensive just blah, we all blah, blah, blah together, you know? I mean, when we're with a group of people, we can see it sometimes. We all kind of rush in to say something, and we don't even listen to the other person because we can't wait to say what we want to say. And we can see it sometimes in big groups. It's almost like a joke. Nobody's listening to a single word anybody says. Everybody's blurting out their own opinions, blurting out because we're all dying to be heard, all dying to be seen and heard and approved of. And it sounds kind of shocking, but if we look at it, it's very primordial, you know. So then on the other hand, indeed, there are some people who also have attachment to be seen and heard, but have very controlled speech. But the downside for those people is that they're very hidden and secret. And maybe that person has to do a bit more speaking. So you've got to look at your own mind. You know, you've got to see the kind of person you are. So this yearning, that's why words pour out of our mouths. I see it on airplanes. I haven't been on airplanes for 18 months, but I'm going to be going on airplanes again very soon. As I said yesterday, off to Europe in the end of November. But I'd be on lots of airplanes, and you'd see how people would pair, you know, two strangers next to each other, and how they start to talk. And within 2 hours, they've told each other their life story, you know. You'll never see each other again, but it's quite powerful. But I remember this one particular two people, I think it's 2 men or 2 women, I can't remember. But one was just, you know, the other one asked a polite question, and then the other person started to answer and didn't stop for 2 hours. And it was like not being unkind, you know, but it was so clear that even just being asked a question about yourself, maybe nobody ever asked her a question. And this is not uncommon. People live in total lonely isolation, even in relationships, especially you have a bitter relationship, and the husband doesn't even look at you, doesn't talk to you, you're like invisible. So we have this yearning to be heard, and one kind person asks a question and your heart pours out, you know. It was really poignant, because we need, so we've got to ask ourselves the question. We've got to ask ourselves the question. First of all, and this sounds so shocking, I wonder why I have a craving to be liked, because being approved of just means being liked. You've got to ask yourself, and why do I need to be liked? And we say, what a stupid question. It's normal to be liked. But we've got to ask it, why do we have the yearning to be liked? Meaning, if you're rejected and there's the husband who hates you now and never talks to you, why is there this terrible sadness and loneliness? Because it tells us that we don't know ourselves. And I'm not trying to be corny here. We don't know how to listen to our own thoughts. We don't know what we think. We don't know what we want. We don't know what's valid. We only know that if someone smiles at us, what I just said must have been valid. So we live in dependence upon other people's opinions. I mean, it's like schizophrenic. Don't think I'm joking. This is the sadness of having attachment, which is the Buddha's analysis, you know. We're like, attachment is a symptom of just like a small person, a very tiny person with no self-respect, no sense of validity, no awareness of what they think, no understanding of who they are, no courage to think I'm doing a good job. So this is why we almost like the Buddhist approach is you're becoming your own person. Like we say, well, how we talk in the West, you know, learning to love ourselves, learning to approve of ourselves. It's a gigantic job. In the Buddha's view, this is what he means by being in samsara, quote unquote, having these unhappy states of mind. And look at the world, look at the loneliness. Loneliness is the symptom of a person who doesn't know themselves, who isn't happy with themselves. Look at us. We all think we're less. We all think we're a failure to one degree or another. And it's an enormous job to turn that around, to be happy with who we are, to be content, to be fulfilled, you know. This is the job. This is our job. And look at the sadness in relationships when people join up with another person, totally believing this is the love of my life, cannot wait to, you know, get married or become partners. And then you get rejected, and then you stay there for the next 40 years until you kill somebody. Just look at the world. I mean, look at the world, you know, because you don't even know you can make a choice. I could actually leave this relationship, we think. This is the tragedy of the victim mind. And attachment is a symptom of a victim. Join the universe, folks. This is what we all are. There's a nice saying among Tibetans that the yogis, the great meditators who've given up sex, drugs, rock and roll, you name it, they're up in the mountains meditating. But they're still thinking of what the people in the village are thinking about them. That's this attachment to being seen and heard and liked, approved of. We all crave to be approved of. I mean, you walk down the street and someone looks mean at you. We take it personally. You're in the freeway and a car blasts his horn at you. We have a panic attack and you don't even know who the person is, but you feel offended because somebody who's invisible to you showed he didn't like you. It shows how fragile we are, you know. It's very fascinating. And so pouring words out of our mouths is a symptom of this. It's like no awareness. And this is Colette's point. It's so fascinating. You know, she's trying to be kind, believing she's really trying to practice. And all of a sudden, so it really shows how little we do know our minds and how much hard work we need to do, not to be depressed about it. It's a real learning, you know.
What do you think makes that fragility?
What, sweetheart? Say it again a different way.
So you were talking about the fragility of our own emotion as it relates to our mind.
Well, the Buddha's analysis, I'm just giving you, all I can do is talk, you know, give me the Buddhist analysis that we've got this thing that's called attachment, which sounds so cute and simple, this deep emotional hunger. And the Buddha would say we've had it for countless lives and we come programmed with it. So that's what our work is, to learn to lessen that attachment, which means to grow who we are ourselves in ourselves, to become strong and confident and fulfilled within ourselves. That's one way of saying what giving up attachment means. It mightn't be evident initially, those words, because it's not how we think in modern psychology. Attachment is this emotional hunger that just thinks we're less than we are. Do you hear what I'm saying, Christine? A little bit.
Yes, absolutely. Yes, I do.
Yeah. So it's a full-on job, you know. I mean, it's a full-on job to become our own person. I love that saying. We say it in our own culture, to become our own person, to have enough courage to know who we are and become content with who we are. Now, I think this is fascinating in our psychological models. I think that our whole society is based, it kind of thinks that the way you become a reasonable person is in reference to others, by becoming a social person. We have a feeling, I think, in our culture that you have to become who you are in relation to others. That's why I think in our culture, psychologically, the idea of going off into a retreat, even for a month, to be on your own, sounds a very weird thing to do. How can you become your own person on your own? The only way to become your own person is in reference to others. And I think look at our culture. You know, these days it's maybe not seen as so weird to not have a partner. But, you know, even at 50 years ago, you were considered completely bizarre, especially if you're a woman, if you didn't have a partner. You're not a real person. So that's our view, I think, in our culture. So the Buddhist approach is we need to do the inner work, and having a retreat is the most powerful way to do it, because then you're literally learning to know your own self deeply and well, and to unpack and unravel your own mind and recognize the delusions, recognize the sources of your own pain, and developing your own marvelous qualities. I mean, you must do it on your own. That's why in our own houses, and this is where, for me, again, now with families, you know, like in my family, there were 7 children. I mean, my mother was a musician. My father was a journalist. They didn't make much money, but they suddenly had 8 babies in 9 years. I mean, God almighty, you know. And my mother was determined to educate us at the best Catholic convents. And of course, they were expensive because they're private schools. I always joke that she still owes the bills 60, 70 years later. I mean, she's dead, of course, because she wanted the best for her beloved children, you know. But we didn't have enough beds. They ran out of beds. They had 8 children, 1 died. There were 7 of us, so we had to share beds. We rotated, you know. Now these 7 little volatile, and we're all bossy. I mean, what, 6 girls and a boy at the end. Tony, my poor brother, you know. But my sisters are all like me, all talk fast, all bossy girls, all, you know, A-type, whatever you call it. variations of it, all bossy girls. So there's very intense environments, 7 little children all piled on top of each other. And of course, with families, we tend to think, oh, there are the kids, and you pile all the kids together. But excuse me, each kid is an individual, separate human being. Okay, we didn't have the money or the resources to have our own bedroom. What a joke, not to mention our own educator, our own nanny or whatever. But I mean, each individual child needs so much intensive work to help that person become a real person. But all the children are just kind of chucked together, and you kind of, it's like survival mode, you know. So each of us manifested our own crazy personalities. I just got angry and was a bully with every one of my sisters, you know. I was the naughtiest girl in the family, and I never thought for 1 minute, what's wrong here? What should I have instead? What would help me? I didn't know that. I just lived in this family with lots of children fighting and yelling and screaming. My father getting drunk, and just dramas and fights, all these bubbling, you know. So then one time, then while I was so naughty when I was like 12, I always joke that I was kind of started to wear stole my mother's earrings and her lipstick and her high heels. And I started walking up and down our main road, trying to seduce the greengrocer's son, you know, and my mother found out, and she had a complete panic attack. I was like 12, I think. It was about the time of Elvis, 1956. I was 12. So my mother freaked out and sent me to boarding school, the same convent that I went to school. But this is what's fascinating. Overnight, I became a saint, because the goodness was in me. I was in love with God. I was in love with Our Lady, the saints. I went to mass. But here's this volatile environment. And to expect 7 little volatile children to behave nicely with each other is completely insane. And it's the same with families. I mean, you know, you live in the same bed as your husband. Most of us aren't rich. You don't have a spare room. You're in each other's face all day. Don't be surprised that you fight. But don't blame yourself. Of course, it's the mind that's the problem, but we need physical space. I mean, I turned into a saint overnight because suddenly my external conditions changed. I had my own bed, not my own room, but I had curtains between the other girls. I went to mass every morning. I had discipline. I studied for the first time. It was like a revelation for me. The same with my gangster friends in prison. These boys in Los Angeles living in the gangs, it's all they know. The environment is so powerful. They get sent to prison. They become these amazing Buddhist practitioners. So what I'm getting at here is this point. The Buddha's point is, of course, the mind is the main problem. But the speech, already, if you control that, you've solved so many problems. But not only that, if we understood the power of the physical conditions, so that volatile family environment, not blaming anybody, of course this volatile little bully came out, but put me in another environment where there was discipline and structure, I became a completely different person. The virtues in me began to grow. It was such a revelation to me, but I would never have known that was missing. I didn't know to say, Mum, I need to go to boarding school. I need a bit of space. We know the word now, we need space. We get it, you know, but I didn't get that when I was a kid. My mother didn't get it. She's an intelligent woman. And I think 99% of our problems would be cancelled out. 1, if we control our speech, but 2, if we give ourselves reasonable physical conditions. Get some space, have your own room if you can. Know that that's a really crucial part of your daily development, especially if you're dealing with lots of people. It's just common sense, but it seems like a revelation to us, you know. I mean, most, you know, I always say it, it's true. The UN or something says, it's something like, you know, 40% of all women who get murdered, people who get murdered, but mostly women, they're murdered by the bloke in the same bed. I'm not surprised. Just in The Guardian, I read a story and saw a video, was from the police videos of this woman, this sweet lady. She came out of the house and she said, yes, I stabbed him. He's in the kitchen. I did stab him. Yes, I'm prepared to admit it. And because he's a mean bully and I hope he's dead. And she's speaking like this on the cameras. It's hilarious. And then she's apologizing for being a nuisance to the policeman. So you can imagine this woman putting up with this bully husband for 40 years, and it never occurred to her to leave. This is how we are so demented. This is how we don't know our own minds, you know. This nice lady with a nice haircut. Oh, I'm a bit cold. Can I have my coat, please? You're so funny. You know, she's hilarious. Yes, I did stab him. I'm confessing everything. I did stab him. And he said, you're not going to do it. And I said, I will. And I did it twice. Everything was like hilarious almost, this woman. But you can imagine for 40 years, there she is putting up with this bully. And one day, I mean, talk about Colette's, you know, words coming out the mouth. Glad you didn't have a knife, Colette. I mean, we just have no common sense. And that shows us how we have little awareness of what the hell is going on in our mind and what conditions are appropriate. If we have any self-awareness, we would realize that it's time to leave that husband, but it never occurs. So she just put up with it, and he put up with it, and they put up with it until one day she stabbed him. This is because we don't have self-awareness. It's just totally tragic, you know. So I'm saying many things here. Yes, Jay. Where's Jay gone? She disappeared. Anyway, that was all a result of your question, Christine, but not necessarily answering your questions. But there you go. In Australia, where's Jay? Are you there, Jay?
Right here. Hi there.
Talk to me, sweetheart.
Okay. So my question is a little bit different.
Okay.
Everything is a viewpoint.
Yep.
So I have worked a lot with everything you've talked about.
Yes.
And I'm also working with trying to get a concept of emptiness. Okay.
Good.
When I open myself up to that, now I'm a very pragmatic person, no mental health issues. I get slightly frightened because I start looking out here and I think, oh my word, this is an illusion.
Uh-huh.
This is what's really going on. I need to get beyond, being attached to all of this stuff. And I'm afraid of my sanity, that I'll lose touch with reality.
That's
and I know
really,
intellectually that's not true.
Yeah, I know. It's a very good point, though, and it's not an uncommon one.
Oh,
it's
good.
not an uncommon one, darling, and it's a really good one to be aware of, and which means you are, in one sense, getting a sense of it. But somehow, what's interesting in the way they teach it is that when we really, this is why to learn, they talk about ultimate reality is, it's like, they often say it's not an illusion, it's like an illusion. They talk about how things are ultimately, but then they talk about that always in reference at the same time to how things exist conventionally. So by staying grounded, that there is, your name is Jai, isn't it?
I pronounce it Jay, actually.
Sorry, okay, Jay. So there is a Jay, there is a husband, there is a mug, there is a cup, there is this, but not from its own side. It's like an illusion. As Lama Zopa says, it's not an illusion, it's like an illusion, which means you're not going to chuck the baby out with the bathwater and become nihilistic. So they talk about, Lama Zopa says, they talk about conventional truth, which is, you establish the thermos, it is a thermos, it keeps your tea warm. And then you say, ultimately, there's no thermos. It's like an illusion. It's a story we've made up. But you always see that story we've made up in reference to the fact that no matter, there still is a thermos there that keeps your tea warm. So in other words, this like an illusion, or this emptiness, doesn't contradict reality. So as Lama Zopa said at one time, when you've realized the emptiness of the thermos, it's as if there is no thermos. But conventionally, there is a thermos. But what does exist is so subtle, it's as if there's no thermos. There's ways of talking about it like that that keeps you grounded.
Okay.
Are you with me? Can you hear that?
Yeah, I am. Yeah.
So they talk about the two truths, conventional truth.
Yes.
And
I'm aware.
ultimate truth. And one of the commonest mistakes about ultimate truth is we chuck the baby out of the bathwater, and that's when the fear comes.
Yep. Okay. All right.
Good.
Yep. I'll work on that some more.
It's a really good point. Thank you, darling.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jay. Jay, thank you, Jay.
Thank you.
So thank you so much. Good. Anybody else? Come on.
Stephanie had a question, but we think you answered it as you continued. It was about the interaction of right speech and self-cherishing.
That's a good, please ask the question. That sounds good.
That was it. How does right speech and self-cherishing interact? The I says some very poor things.
Who was asked the question?
It was Stephanie. I don't know if she
Are you
can
here, Stephanie, darling?
speak
I'd
her
love to talk
question
to
out loud.
May I,
I'm here.
Let's have a conversation, sweetheart. Ask it a bit more. Add a bit more words to it.
So it's interesting. I'm able to see that my speech gets better when I let go of the I, when I let go of the ego.
Good. Okay, that makes total sense. Yeah, so okay, let's look at that. That's a really good point, Stephanie. And this is Christine's point, I think. I mean, one of the things, how, not saying Christine is like that, but what I was mentioning was when we have not much awareness, when we're very caught up in ourselves and very self-conscious, very low self-esteem, and then someone says, how are you? And suddenly you're like that woman on the airplane, next 2 hours pouring out the heart, you know, because that person's not being heard by others, but especially not being heard by themselves, which is the symptom also of being totally self-centered. And it's not being cruel. When we feel sorry for a woman like that. We think the poor one, no one's loving her, but actually she's being totally self-centered. That's why her speech just pours out, because she doesn't have enough awareness of herself. And so it's not criticizing us. Buddha's telling us that our self-cherishing and our selfishness and all the rest, they are why we suffer, and they are why we are so why we're not conscious in a good way. So as soon as you're thinking about other people, as soon as you're trying to be kind to another person, reaching out to another person, then you're thinking more of that person, and there's less of the unhappy self-consciousness, you know. So then naturally we're more, I mean, if it's coming from a genuine place, then we're naturally more contained. It really makes sense, because you've extended yourself to encompass another. It really makes sense. It makes total sense. Yes. Does that sound right, Stephanie?
You know, for me, it's interesting because the more I think about right speech, the less I have to say.
No, it's true, sweetheart. It's a very interesting point. Let me tell you how I like to frame it for myself, using this nice analogy that a bird needs 2 wings. So the wisdom wing, which is all kind of really the work that we're discussing here, the work about ourselves, understanding ourselves, knowing our mind, unpacking and unraveling, seeing what's going on, lessening attachment, lessening anger, growing self-confidence, growing self-contentment. That's the wisdom wing, speaking simply. So now, then you've got the compassion wing. So strictly speaking, it's really right. You listen to this, Stephanie. So from the wisdom wing point of view, which is the work you do on yourself, it's very personal. The only reason to speak to somebody is if you want to clarify something that'll help you get to see yourself more, like going to your therapist. The only other reason to speak is if it's going to be of benefit to others, which is the compassion wing. So really, with you, so then let's say you hello, hi, Mary, how are you? That's the first thing you'd say. How are you, Mary? Because you're with another person, you try to act that it's for the other person's sake. How are you? Oh, really? And you listen to the other person. Now, if they ask you how you are, you say, oh, I'm really well, even if you're having a fight with your husband, because it's not appropriate that they hear your private life. So you say, I'm doing very well. And that's it. There isn't much reason to say something. It really is true, Stephanie. And it seems quite shocking. If we do an analysis of the word we say throughout the day, much of it is unconscious. Much of it is just pouring out what our feelings are, giving all our opinions, wanting to be heard. Very rarely are the words we say of benefit to others. There's just this uncontrolled blah, blah, blah. So right speech has got pretty powerful meaning. You know, it's true. So then, you know, and if you really are working on your own mind very well, okay, if you're not working on your mind, then as we say in our culture, it's very nice. You wear your heart on your sleeve. If you haven't seen me for 10 years, let's say, and you've just, you know, if you're not working on your mind, and I'm your old friend, and I'll say, how are you, Stephanie? You'll burst into tears and you'll tell me your whole heart, which is maybe okay. But if you're really working on yourself, and you even just had a divorce from your husband, I wouldn't necessarily even be able to tell that you're having a problem, because you're not wearing your heart on your sleeve, because you're dealing with yourself internally. And you'd say, I'm very well, Rabina, how are you? And that, so really we can see the more we learn to do this inner job of becoming aware and conscious and working on our minds, the more content we become and the more contained, and therefore the more aware of others and able to then be of use to others, which is the compassion wing. It's another way of saying it, isn't it?
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Doris. Thank you, Stephanie. Yes, people, come on. More. It's another 30 minutes to go. Jay, yes, talk to me.
So this brought up another issue. I know the value. I occasionally say to myself, you need to pray to Saint Fu. That's STFU, because I'm
What's STFU? What's that? Saint. Spell it out. Oh, I see. I hear it now. Go on and talk.
Thank you.
I haven't heard that before. I love it. Go on.
Yeah. Okay. So, but what I enjoy, and I have the thought that at least some of it is valuable. I have a lot of energy and I engage jokingly with people, always in a careful way. I never
Okay.
put down humor, but I kind of question, I'm torn about whether I just need to be quiet.
I know
rather
what you're
than-
saying, Jad. No, I know. And I think we've all got different personalities, you know. So I think to be joking, if you're sincere in your heart to be kind to other people, there's nothing wrong with that. It's wonderful. Talk about the weather, talk about the football, make jokes, but we have to see what's happening inside. We have to be aware of where it's coming from, you know.
And for me, it's coming from love.
Okay, then it's
my
fine.
way of expressing
But if
that.
it's coming from love, you'll know when to shut up and you'll know when to say something.
Okay.
That's the point. You
Yes.
understand, darling?
I
Yeah.
do. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. Go on, people. What else? This is all very helpful. Good discussions. What else, people? Okay.
We do have another question from Colette again.
Colette, yes, talk to me. Talk to me. Unmute.
So these are interesting. How do you deal with, I mean, we're in an ocean of lonely people who don't know themselves. We're just surrounded. So whenever I'm in a crowd, people are just dying to tell their story.
Yeah, that's
And
right.
I'm happy to listen.
That's right. Good.
But it's difficult because it gets draining if it's like coming from so many sources. And that sometimes I flee and I go hide in the bathroom because I'm overwhelmed with so much
I hear you.
need. Like, how do you ground yourself?
I really hear you. Yeah. I hear you, Colette. It's a very important point. It's very, very powerful point, you know. So that's where we have to know what our limitation is. We absolutely have to know. And what that means in Buddhist terms is your limitation is how much inner work you've done yourself, how much. So the Buddhist term is how much renunciation you've got. What that means, how much you've given up attachment, given up anger, which sounds kind of a very passive way of putting it. It's not the way we necessarily talk in our culture. I would say it's the more you are aware of yourself and oh dear, I'm sorry. I'll have to let it ring. It's way over there. The more you know yourself, the more content you are within yourself, the less needy you are, the less distressed you are, the more you can handle others. And that is the real point in Buddhist practice. The whole Lam Rim, if you're aware of it, the very first stage is all the wisdom wing. You've got to work on yourself. And then to the degree to which you've accomplished that is the degree of your compassion and your ability to handle others. So if we're still very fragile, you suddenly launch into a big group of 50 people, you can't cope, then you just don't do it. If you know, let's say you can't cope with your mother, your poor old mum, you know, I mean, because you're still so fragile, you haven't done enough work on your own mind, then you don't go near your mother. We've got to know our limitations. So when you study the Bodhisattva path and you hear the levels of incredible compassion that we are capable of, then as one of the lamas, you know, he said, you've got to be a suitable vessel for these particular level of practices. The really highly advanced levels are where you would take the blame, where you would put up with the shit, where you'd put up with the abuse because you're so advanced. It's all grist for your mill. You've got to know where you're at, which means you've got to know. It's like you go to play tennis. If you try to play tennis with Federer and you're only in grade 1, you're going to you'll be knocked out. Don't even try. So we don't think like this in spiritual teaching, but this is a really clear point in the way the Buddhist teachings are structured. First is the work on yourself. The more you're capable of this, the more you're capable of compassion. And then eventually you have this bodhicitta with this paradigm shift where you've done so much work on yourself. You've given up any load of rubbish about I. You can do anything for others and it will never disturb you. We've got to know where we're at, Colette. And it's very hard in this world because sometimes you don't have a choice. You just got to do your best. You see my point?
Much wisdom. Thank you.
Good. Yes, darling. Yes.
And then Luann is next.
Good, Luann. Yes. Yes, Luann, talk to me.
Hi, Venerable. Nice to see you. This is a wonderful, wonderful talk. It's just what I needed to hear tonight.
Oh,
It's just
I'm so happy.
last night and tonight. It's just
Cool.
brilliant. I just really hits the point. I have some stuff about speech, and
Yeah.
just as an example, you know, in our culture, I mean, there's I guess this is saying how much renunciation I still have yet to do, but if you're living with somebody else all the time, like say your husband, and there's things that you know, you're able to let a lot of the little things that annoy you go. It's like, big deal, who cares, right? How important is it? It's not important. But there's sometimes I feel like I need to sort of do a little pushback sometimes. Otherwise, I start getting too resentful. You know, so I almost, it's a little bit of like kind of managing my own buildup of resentment to be able to push back a little bit or say something. And I don't know. I don't feel, yeah. Anyway, I just,
I know.
guess
this is a minefield, Luann. I mean, I don't know how people manage to live with each other, frankly. I mean, I always joke and say if I had a husband and children, they'd be dead husbands and dead children.
Well,
I
moved into my own room. I now have my own
There you
room. It
go.
helps a lot. Honestly, my
Luann,
son moved
honestly.
out. My son is gone and I moved into his room. So
There you go, darling. I think it's just
it helps.
plain, it's just so intelligent. It's almost like expecting too much from ordinary people. Even if you're working on your mind, it's the most incredible practice to be able to really practice properly and really work on your own mind and really learn to separate yourself from the other person's stuff. I mean, you've got to find ways where but it can become so manipulative. I mean, when you hear, I don't know, it's a minefield. So give an example. I mean, yes, you see, if we really understand the Buddha's teachings deeply and you're really practicing properly, which is pretty intense, every time the other person does or says something that is the trigger for you to be angry, I mean, you have to see that it's your anger. You have to see it's your anger. And then, of course, if the person is even, you know, like, that's the wisdom wing work. And the logic is this: the more we work on our own attachment and own anger, then whatever the husband does, it will be water off a duck's back if your delusions aren't there. So the trouble is living with another person. They're triggering your delusions every damn day. So it's almost too much to bear. But that's what happens in most couples. You start to negotiate. Well, I'll work on my mind if you work on your mind, and you do this if I don't do that. It becomes exhausting to do this. I mean, you know, and then if it gets to the point where your husband's beating you up, well, you got to bloody well leave, honey. I mean, I'm just sort of talking. You understand?
Of course, yeah, no, of course.
I mean, and this is where, of course, if you don't even have the luxury to leave, then even that becomes your practice, which sounds so intense. So if you're really practicing, whereas, you know, you say, well, at a certain point, I'm sorry, I've got to say something. So then you got to work out what's reasonable. You got to, I mean, I'll put it this way. For example, years ago, when I ran our prison project, we had an organization, I was the boss, and we had about 9 full-time staff, and I had some, you know, pretty wonderful people working for me, pretty crazy people. It was pretty intense. People working 40, 60 hours a week, really working hard. So naturally what happens, people fight. This is normal human beings, you know. And Mary, I'm making up names now. Mary would come to me and say, Fred did this and Fred did that. And then Fred would come to me and say, Mary did this and Mary did that. And I'd say, I understand that this is going to happen, but I would always insist as much as you can. That's what Fred did, but what's your role? What's your mind doing? Work on your own mind. I never encourage them to mediate, to talk to each other, because when you talk to each other, it's like, you did this and I'm feeling this way, and we feel it's valid. But basically, you're blaming the other person for you getting annoyed. Your hubby slurps his tea. I mean, I'd practically kill my husband if he slurped his tea every day. But, you know, he's allowed to slurp his bloody tea. But, you know, we get it. The smallest things can make us crazy. This is why living with other human beings when you're an ordinary person is pretty full on. So I'm glad you've got your own room.
Me too,
I'm
baby.
just
Me
talking.
too.
Just talk.
Me too.
The courage
And I
we've
find,
got.
yeah,
Yeah,
it's hard
the
to,
courage
yeah,
we've
it's
got
hard
to
to
see our
know.
own
Yeah.
mind. What, darling? Say it again. What?
I just saying about, you know, in our culture, it's like, you know, you know, sometimes you're encouraged to just like try to figure out to say your truth in the kindest way possible to somebody without saying it mean, but say what you mean, but don't say it mean. And you know, And
I
yet
understand.
I've done that recently. I recently had an editor who I've been working with for 2 years, and she just kept flaking on me and flaking on me and flaking on me at the middle of deadlines. And I decided to finally say something. And
Now but that's different. Now, honey, that's different. That's a professional relationship. And if the person isn't doing their job, it is appropriate to do something. So with your husband, if what he does is outside his job description of husband, then you are right to point it out. That's different. That's professional and different, but it can't come from anger. You can't put up with a person if she's not doing her job properly. You must say something. So you've got to see the difference between being angry and then seeing, well, you're not doing your part of the deal. If your husband's not fulfilling his contract, then it's right to say something, but not out of anger. Not from anger. That's the
thank
part.
you for that distinction. Yeah, thank you for that
It's a big
distinction.
distinction,
That's very helpful. That's
Otherwise,
helpful
it's
because
passivity. You just put up with your editor because you think you're being patient. That's absurd. No, your editor's not doing their job, and you should fire them. So if your husband doesn't do his job,
she fired me. She fired me for
other way
saying
around.
something,
No,
but
okay.
whatever.
Okay, whatever. You see
She
my
already
point?
got paid. She already got paid, so she was
Okay.
ready to leave anyway. So
But
anyway,
and with your husband too. Now, if you know there's some karma there between you and the husband, and you know it's worthwhile you being there, and you know it's your practice, then you can love him for who he is. I mean, I always talk about a friend of my mum. You know, my mother had an alcoholic husband, my darling daddy, whom I adore. And then one of her best, and she was a Catholic, and one of her best friends, Sheila. I mean, I loved Sheila. It's this working class woman over the other side of town who had this dreadful Reg, who was this drunken, horrible husband who beat up his 5 sons and his wife, Sheila. But Sheila was in love with God. She lived on 80 Marlboros a day and bread and butter and cups of tea. She was an amazing woman. I just adored Sheila. I'd go, and she had 5 sons, so that was part of the reason I liked going over to her house. But I mean, she had this dreadful husband, in the most classic way, a dreadful husband. He'd come home from, at lunchtime drunk, and he'd jump into bed and jump on top of her. But Sheila, it was truly water off a duck's back. She knew that God was in Reg. She knew God was in everybody, and she loved Reg for who he was. Now, you can't pretend to be happy when you're living like that. And she was his hilarious, wonderful woman who I adored to be with. She was the most amazing example. It was nothing to her. Reg was one of her boys, and if she never thought to leave Reg, but she loved him for who he was and believed God was in everybody, and she was unaffected, and that's a truth. So if you like that, then you put up with your rubbish husband and whatever else, But I mean, who's like that? We got to see where we're at, we've got to see where we're at. And if people had enough common sense and left their husband, you'd be 40% more women on the planet. I understand.
thank you. Very helpful. I'm going to stay in my own room.
There you go. And then, I mean, the thing is, when we fall in love with somebody and we marry them or whatever we do, because there's attachment, we then think, well, I can show everything. I can fart and pee on him and do everything because he loves me. It's too much for human beings to bear. We're ordinary humans. So this is why I think the aristocrats are very sensible, like in The Crown. They have their own damn bedrooms. So, if you hop into bed to each other, you have a lovely time, and then you go and fart and snore on your own bed, and it's too much to expect ordinary people to put up with rubbish. We want to be seen. I want to see my husband look beautiful one day, not just smelly and farty. I mean, we're human beings, We're so naive with our expectations of each other. We're so ridiculous. Anyway, I can't imagine how anybody would live in the same bed as anybody else. I know as a kid, I must have very strong monastic karma. When I was a kid, people talk about getting married, and I try not to say anything, but I thought, how could they live in the same bed as another person all day? I get claustrophobia thinking about it. So we've obviously got different karma. It's good for me to be a nun, I promise. Anyway, I'm glad you got your own room, Luann. Well done, girl. Anyway, I say funny things. I know that. Yes, Claude, what's happening?
No, I was just gonna tell Luann, me and my wife have been sleeping in different beds for 13 years. And we made the decision, in order for us to be at our best, we need to get good sleep. She snores, I snore.
There you go. I can't imagine it, I tell you.
And we just said, in order for us to be of benefit to
That's
our
right.
sons,
Have your own space.
we need to be rested and well
There you go.
for
So
the end
sensible.
of the day.
So sensible. Well done, Claude. Well done, darling. Thanks for that. I know, it's very fascinating. So go on, people, any more questions? Interesting.
Yeah, there's a question from Hannah. I'm not
Yes.
sure if she can speak it. She typed it out in the chat, so I might have to read it out for her, but we'll give
Okay,
a second to see if she can chime in.
Yeah.
Hannah?
Are you there, Hannah?
Hello. Hi.
Hi.
Yeah. Okay. So my question is that in regard to what you were saying earlier about not knowing the self.
Yes, darling. Yes.
And that, you know, and that urge to speak about the self.
Yes.
And to
Hannah.
fill the silence.
Yeah.
You know,
Yes.
in some way.
Yes.
So I've noticed, like, about 6 months ago, I started really experiencing more strongly than I ever have, very intense periods sometimes of embarrassment, like halfway through maybe sharing something or talking in a group.
Yeah, right.
And the embarrassment, the self-conscious feeling and embarrassment is so intense that I can no longer think, let alone speak. So I'll often stop mid-sentence.
I understand, Hannah. I hear
with
you,
people looking at me. Yeah.
Seriously, that I hear you.
And so what I often feel is like what I noticed more recently with that, because I've had nothing to do, obviously, but just watch it when it happens.
That's right.
But there is this really strong contradiction in that. Like, so this part going, see me, see me, and this other part going, don't you dare see me.
I hear you, Hannah. It's very fascinating, darling. So how are you interpreting it to yourself? How are you understanding it? How are you processing it?
Well, the only thing that I can really come to, I think this is it's interesting speaking to you, because you keep bringing up topics where I have not been able to move with the processing.
Yes.
But so my intellectual understanding is just that there's this self-identity that really doesn't care whether it's being seen or not seen, as long as there's still an I, and that the closer that I get to knowing myself and having the courage to just be me and be disliked. It's a book I read recently, The Courage to Be Disliked.
Exactly.
The closer that I get to that, I seem to be throwing up from within me blocks.
The other one. No, I hear it, sweetheart. I really do hear it. I really do hear it. I really do hear it. And this is, one other word for it. Isn't that what people call, I'm a shy person? And when people look at you, you blush and you feel terribly self-conscious. Is it that kind of feeling?
Yeah, it is. And it's not something that I'm totally unfamiliar with, but I've never experienced to degrees like this, where I cannot even think, let alone get out a word.
That's so fascinating, isn't it? No, I think it is just, it is too, it seems to be like it's a symptom of you are doing the work, you know? Sometimes they say even in the classical Indian texts that when you start to learn, say, this particular meditation technique, they say one of the signs of success, even in the early stages, is that you think your mind is getting worse. But your mind is not getting worse. You're just becoming conscious of what the hell is going on inside you, Hannah. So you kind of, you're experiencing it in more intense ways. And another way to put it, I always quote this story. A friend of mine who's a serious meditator, he's done 3-year retreats, 4-year retreats. He's a monk, serious Australian guy. He's a serious practitioner, really working on his mind. And at some point, he had like waves of unbelievable rage and arrogance and anger, that the kind of, in other words, his particular delusions, like yours, you seem to be like a patient person and a fairly shy person, you know, so that's coming up even more vividly for you. Well, for him, this was just pouring out. He was really distressed, and he went to Lama Zopa and he said, and Lama Zopa laughed and said, fantastic, the dirt has to come out. The dirt has to come out. So sometimes our own particular tendencies can look much more powerful. My sense is it's just that. So in a way, it's a good sign, baby. So you keep working on yourself. You keep doing it, you know?
Okay, that's cool. I just, thank you so much. I didn't know whether there was more to add to that or whether I was just seeing it and just keep watching it.
I think it's great. I think it's just because you're working on, if you weren't working on yourself, It's a bit like if you go to the gym, you come home with pain you didn't even know you had. You come home with muscles you never met before, but that's a good pain. But if you sat and watched telly and had that pain, you should be worried. So when you're practicing, you're stirring up all the shit, girl. You've got, like a friend of mine who's a therapist says, you're having your hands in your own shit. So we see it more vividly and it comes up more vividly. I think it's a good sign. I don't know. Just keep working at yourself, girl. You think you're doing well. You're moving forward. You're doing what you have to do to, you know, you think you're doing well. Good.
Yeah, I think so.
Keep moving. Hannah.
Interesting.
Okay.
Yeah.
Go on.
Thank you so much.
Say that again. What?
I was just going to say it's interesting, the analogy that you just used, because I actually do spend way too much time in front of the TV and get really sore. So, you know, I hear that, universe. All right.
There you go. There you go. Keep moving, Hannah. It's all right, sweetheart. Thank you so much. Thank you. Anybody else? 22. We have 8 minutes before we finish our session. Been very delicious these 2 days. Been very interesting. People's experiences. Thank you so much, everybody. What else? Nothing. Nothing at all. That's good. That's okay. So, okay, just to summarize then, just to summarize. You know, this, we can see from all these words that it's kind of common so much. You know, you mightn't be a Buddhist, you mightn't even be using Buddhist methods. But because I think the Buddha, when we put him really down, we talk about him in very down-to-earth way, which is how Lama Yeshe did from the very beginning. You know, if you talk in a classical Tibetan or Indian way, the cultures are so different. We can hardly hear what Buddha's saying. So when you put in your own words, we can see it's universal. We can see it's not religion. It's not something you believe in. It's this incredible understanding of the human mind. You know, it's what we're hungry for. So of course, I'm using the specific Buddhist approach, talking about the delusions as opposed to the virtues, and you know, just framing it in that way, which is the Buddhist one. And of course, the Buddhist approach is that we are this work in progress. You know, as Lama Zopa says, we can mold our mind into any shape we like. It's an ongoing process. It's like there are skills there, there's methodology there. It's tried and tested for 2000 plus years, you know, so it's kind of encouraging. I mean, we tend to think in our culture, we're rather arrogant that, you know, Mr. Freud began the job of working on the mind and therapy and the rest. Well, I mean, as His Holiness the Dalai Lama points out, it was these amazing Indians before the Buddha. They're the ones who began the investigation into the nature of self. They're the ones who came up with this amazing model of the mind, not coming from watching the brain, but from internally observing the actual subjective cognitive process itself. It's like incredibly brilliant, you know, and it's amazing. It's more than 3,000 years old. It's extraordinary. And then Buddha went as far as he could go in that system and then diverge in his own direction. So there's been this incredible knowledge in the world, and it's only now in the West, with His Holiness the Dalai Lama having all these conferences with all the scientists and then, you know, the people. And there's now in the West, the arrogant scientists, you know, we think we're the ants pants, discovering there's some amazing wisdom in other parts of the world. I mean, what do we know about India and China? Nothing. You go back to the Greeks, that's about it, isn't it? Nothing wrong with the Greeks, but so we're now opening our minds, and there's more and more awareness now, and more people appreciating the Buddhist view of the mind. You know, it's very fascinating. It's great. Communication, it's good. So we have to learn to be our own therapists, as Lama Yeshe puts it. And the thing is that I found encouraging from the very beginning when I first heard the Buddhist teachings in Australia from Lama Yeshe and Lama Zopa at Chenrezig Institute in Queensland when I was 31 or something. I remember I didn't understand 90% of what they were saying, but I got that we've got this marvelous potential, that we've got this incredible potential, that there's nothing set in stone. Whereas the way ego feels and why we despair so terribly is because we think we're set in stone. This is who I am and there's nothing I can do about it. There's no view like that in Buddhism, and that should give us such courage, you know, that no matter how bad things get, we've got this marvelous potential and then we can do the work. It's internal. And it's incredible. We can do that and get such courage. You know, that's the wisdom wing. Then to that degree, we can be beneficial to others. The bird needs 2 wings. So that's all I've got to say, you folks. That's enough. What do you think, Gina? Time to go.